It's a tricky proposition to name a game after a quality-describing adjective, because it can really go one of two ways. You can either use a neutral or negative descriptor, and that ultimately leads to built-in jokes about your game just based off the title. Or you can go with a positive one, such as the case with Marvelous, which ultimately seems like your game is bragging, and makes people want to hate it immediately. But fortunately, Marvelous manages to pull it off because it is a solid game. Now the premise is Dion, Jack, and Max are 3 kids going to summer camp. They've been assigned to the summer camp's firewood gathering team, or as they much rather prefer to be called, Awesome Team, and have since strayed off the path, found some treasure, and now their supervising adult has been kidnapped by a pirate. To rescue her, they now have to sail the seas and collect various treasures to unlock the gates to the greatest treasure of all, known simply as Marvelous. But, and this is just a working theory I have, I don't think that's the actual name of the treasure. I think it's like One Piece, where it wasn't split into 1,000,001 pieces, instead of it being the name. Instead, Marvelous is just saying, hey, this is a really kick-ass treasure. Marvelous isn't the actual name. Now the game itself is a top-down adventure game, but unlike most top-down adventure games, instead of focusing on combat, while there is some, is much more heavily centered on puzzle solving. To begin with, each of the 3 characters has a different physical profile. You've got Dion, who's smaller and faster than the rest of the characters. You've got Jack, who's lankier and a bit more agile than the other 2. And you've got Max, who's a bit bigger, but also stronger. Because of their different physical statures, there are bits of the game which will single each of the 3 out. In addition, there's a different set of tools each character will get over the course of the entire game, that the others will not have access to. And because of that, the core mechanics of this game are trying to find different ways to have each of the 3 characters interacting with the puzzle in a slightly different way, utilizing their teamwork to ultimately clear the path and move forward closer to their treasure, and saving their teacher. Now the game takes place in 2 modes. You've got your top-down adventure mode as well as a first-person interacting mode. The one main constant between these 2 modes is the search ability. Essentially you can stop the game at any time and look around and try and get hints on what you're supposed to do and just get a better description of the environment around you. If you truly get stuck, you can blow your whistle and call in a bird and bribe him to tell you what to do next as well. But once you've searched around the environment, you have to figure out what you're supposed to do next. And this is where both your items and teamwork come into play. Depending on your character's equipment setup, as well as their overall positioning and the puzzle itself, whatever you interact with might go completely different ways. For example, if there's a giant boulder in your way, you might have to position your characters all around it to try and lift it as a group, whereas if you have everyone on one side, you won't be able to accomplish this. Or if a puzzle requires the interaction of 2 different characters' equipment, you might have to position them different places in the room in order to progress. Ultimately, the puzzle-solving elements that utilize teamwork as well as your character's unique traits and equipment all work splendidly well. Moreover, even if you have to do the same puzzle a couple times, they don't make you do them back to back. Typically you'll have different puzzles and different adventure bits in between having to do that, or they'll throw in like one of these small mini-game segments. As well, the puzzles themselves are actually really unique and clever, and require you to actually think, and not just mess with your inventory and hope you get it right. For example, very early on you have to chase a mouse out of your teacher's tent. And it's not really ever adequately explained how you do this, you just sort of have to figure out how to block off the hole after trapping it in the tent. Very clever, but it doesn't necessarily just hand you the answers. It still requires you to do some thinking, even if you kind of have an idea of what's going on. And I definitely appreciate that. Overall, I think that the puzzle design and really just progression of the game is well done. The pathfinding for the AI is a little bit dumb, so they might get caught on bits of environment and not follow you through transitions, which is frustrating to deal with. Likewise, having to pick up a specific object as a character or swap to characters disbands your entire team, so you have to recall them even if you're just swapping your character, which feels largely unnecessary. The one thing about the puzzles I don't like, however, is that they are very linearly designed. Essentially, there is no variance in your character's inventories. Each character will get each specific item in the specific order they're designed to, and you can't have one character with another character's item. Seriously, if they just had the ability to swap equipment with other members, that would have made the puzzles even more in-depth, and I think would have added a lot more replayability to the game. That said though, the gameplay is great. The overall presentation of Marvelous is excellent. The visual presentation is quite nice, all the sprites are full of personality and are very well detailed. The animations are quite nice, and there's a lot of nice little personality-filled bonus things that you don't really notice. Like if you play as Dion and run ahead because the other characters can't catch up, they'll stop for a second, do a unique animation, and then try and catch up to you. And that's great, I love that. Each of the characters has their own unique series of animations which work well, and ultimately I think creates a great visual package. The audio presentation is also excellent. The songs themselves range from ambient and fitting to just really catchy, and they pretty much all work well, leading to an overall very excellent presentation in the game. And that, in a nutshell, is Marvelous. It's a great little Super Famicom title. Unfortunately, however, it was never released outside Japan. I'm actually playing with a fan translation on an actual Japanese cartridge, and the fan translation is very well done. However, this does mean unless you have access to said fan translation, or you're fluent in Japanese, it might be a little more difficult than it's worth. Which is unfortunate, because outside of that, I would totally recommend this game. But if you can't understand the language, it doesn't become as much of a recommendation, simply because there's a lot of hints and understanding of what you need to do and where you need to go that would ultimately make it a little bit more challenging than it ever needs to be, which is largely unfortunate because this is a great game that you shouldn't miss out on. Now, regardless of the condition of the cartridge or whether it comes with the rest of the stuff or not, Marvelous comes at a pretty consistent price. It's not as cheap as most imports, but regardless of it being complete or cart only, it tends to cost about $20 to $35, and at that price this game comes highly recommended. Again, if you can understand the language. If you don't mind just tooling around and getting stuck every now and then, it's still a pretty solid game, but not knowing the language definitely takes a lot out of the personality of this game, which is a shame because this game is full of it. At the end of the day, Marvelous is an excellent game. How good is it? Well, despite the fact that I've gotten a couple dozen Super Famicom games over the past year, Marvelous is easily one of, if not the singular best Super Famicom game I've played this year. I am quite enthralled with this game, and at the end of the day, this game is truly marvelous.